The people are both the masters of both the Congress and the courts. Not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow the men who would pervert it. Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. And where the government fears the people, you have liberty. Welcome to this great episode of The Real Story. My name's Daniel Happnie, and what we're going to go over tonight, we're going to go over the End the Fed, why you, a Sharon resident, should despise the Federal Reserve System, why you, a Sharon resident, should want to get rid of the Federal Reserve System, and why you, a Sharon resident, should be getting up out of your chair, off the couch, and start realizing that these globalist bankers are hurting your family. So, we'll start off with a little bit of Fed speak. What we have for you is we have Alan Greenspan. I don't know if you remember, but I wanted you to get this piece. This is Alan Greenspan speaking about, well, gee, how's my relationships with presidents? And he lets the viewers or the people know, in this case on PBS, that the Federal Reserve, this private banking cartel, no different from OPEC, doesn't give a darn about what you need, what you want, what Congress or the Senate or even the president has to say or wants or need, because they're a private bank and they're going to do what they damn well please.
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration or the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are don't frankly matter. And I've had very good relationships with the president.
Well, that was an interesting read. Now you know a little bit about how the Fed chairman feels about you and your family and the rest of your country. So we did something interesting. I went to Boston, Massachusetts, to the Federal Reserve Bank, and we went on a specific day. The day we chose was 11/22/08. And why that's important for you, the Sharon viewer, and the rest of you viewers, is because that happened to be the anniversary that we lost a president. In this case, the president was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And if you remember, with his executive order, 11,110, he created a competing currency, the United States note. Now that money, he was able to create without having to borrow and pay any interest on, because he used the money we had, in this case, the silver we had at Fort Knox. And so here's a president who decided to go against these globalist bankers, in this case, the Federal Reserve. Now, a lot of you people may think, gee, Oswald, Oswald killed Kennedy and this and that. I'm here to tell you, what did Oswald gain? What was his gain? Let's go the quid pro quo, What was in it, Cui bono? What's this all about? And so think about it. Here's a man who created a competing currency. So on his anniversary anyway, there was an End the Fed rally in Boston. And so what we have for you is we have some great footage of the End the Fed rally and also some fantastic interviews. But it was important that you realized we lost a president over this because he had what? He had courage. This is The Real Story. I'm here with Hal Shurtleff of the JBS, and Hal's holding a book. And I'd have to ask you, Hal, can you tell us a little bit about that book?
The book is entitled The Creature from Jekyll Island. Jekyll Island was the hunting lodge of J.P. Morgan in Georgia, where a secret meeting was held in 1910. In fact, it was about this time, in November of 1910, and that set the stage for the Federal Reserve Bank. And there were about 7 or 8 of these people that represented about 1/4 of the world's wealth.
Total wealth.
Total wealth.
And so they got together on this island called Jekyll Island.
That's right.
And these were bankers, weren't they?
These were all bankers or people who represented. The only one who wasn't was Nelson Aldrich, U.S. Senator from Rhode Island, who was the maternal grandfather of our beloved David Rockefeller.
So if we remember names like Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller,
That's
who
right.
actually made it to VP at some point.
That's right. He was the man who, the instrumental man behind the Fed. His grandson became vice president.
So these really rich people have been doing this stuff for a while, and they're probably pretty good at it. And they possibly made money during all these wars, lending money to people.
Well, the first director of the Federal Reserve Bank is a man named Paul Warburg. Paul Warburg was making about $200,000 a year. Now, in 1910, that was some serious money because it was all backed by gold.
Yeah,
He became the first director of the Federal Reserve Bank, and he took a salary of about $1,500. Now, he didn't do it because of his desire to serve the public. He did it because there was the interest there. Every nickel that the Federal Reserve loans out, they get an interest, and that's where the action is.
It's interesting because they not only, for the viewers out there, they have to remember that in 1 week, go back about 3-4 weeks ago, the Federal Reserve created $930 billion
Out of thin air.
in 1 week. So you got to ask yourself, for the viewers and stuff, who's got to pay the interest on that?
Well, what happens is that when we go to the supermarket or go to the store and the price of a candy bar from 75 cents to $1.50, it's because of what Congress did by authorizing this printing of this money, and the Federal Reserve Bank is profiting from it.
Exactly. Now we have what? We have the bailout of the bankers, where the bankers aren't using the money to help the people.
That's
I
right.
call it stealing from the poor and giving to the rich.
That's exactly what it is.
This is almost like the Robin Hood thing again, okay, but backwards. Well, we've let this, who was the guy in charge of Sherwood? Riding through the land, Dennis Moore with lupins and hats. I'll know the story. But no, what I was going with was trying to think of the sheriff of Nottingham. Once again,
Right.
He's shaking down the little people, okay, so the king can have some more money. Well, anyway, the other thing with the wonderful Fed, because once again, here we are in Boston. Okay, we're in front of the Federal Reserve Building in Boston, and this is the institution that has to or doesn't have to pay any taxes.
That's right. In fact, people think the Federal Reserve Bank is a federal government entity. It's a private entity established by Congress back in 1913.
So,
in fact, it was right before the Christmas recess, when half the people were already home, is when they gave it to us.
So this private banking cartel, and I say private because my viewers don't own it.
No, they don't.
It's not a public
That's right.
interest, okay? It's not part of
And
our
you know
government.
something? If you have a private business, you may have been audited by the IRS because if there's a couple of forms weren't filled out, or you didn't pay some taxes you thought you were supposed to pay. The Federal Reserve Bank has never been audited, outside of their furniture and their paper clips, but as far as their books, had never been audited. And what's nice is that there's a bill in Congress right now, sponsored by Ron Paul, to repeal the Fed. And that's why you see the signs here, H.R.
2755.
Now that bill will go out of the Congress will go out of session, but there'll be another bill number coming up in January. So if you watch this in January of 09, you got to keep your eyes open. So
That's a good thing. I figure by February, the Americans will be waking up to, high heating bills, okay, to, times get a little tougher when your currency
Foreclosures.
bar is a little
That's
less.
right.
Exactly, Let's see. The other question I'd have, I stand in front of this Federal Reserve, and we discussed that they don't have to pay any federal tax. You said they didn't have to be audited, but I remember reading the Federal Reserve Act, and it said they don't have to pay federal tax.
That's right.
That's kind of nice. Wouldn't you guys like a business? How about you citizens? Would you like to not pay federal tax? How about,
That's right.
when I read they don't have to pay state tax. Would you guys like to get rid of your state income tax? You question one people would. I asked my viewers, I said, in regards to question one, I'm getting windy, but
right.
if I own part of their labor, what's to keep me from owning it all?
That's right.
And is their labor their personal property? But anyway,
And let's close with this. Inflation is a tax. In fact, John Maynard Keynes, the famous Fabian socialist economist, said in 1920, he said that governments can confiscate the vast portion of the citizens' wealth, and 1 in a million doesn't even know what's happening. But I get you, these people know about inflation. They know that it's theft, and I think more and more people understand. They may not have all the information. In fact, you digest this book, and you know more about banking and money than the average bank president does. and the average postgraduate major in economics, because they know very little.
Agreed. I've
They
met
may
about
be
you.
arrogant. They have degrees and they're very arrogant, but they don't know how the system works.
Could you tell
Some
us?
of them do know how, and they're part of it. You see.
Could you tell us a little bit about the chapter on bailouts?
Well, in chapter 2 of this book, and this book was written in 1995, by the way. It's called "The Name of the Game is Bailout." Things don't change much. It's the same old system. The banks are set up to fail, and they be bailed out by the taxpayers, either nationally or internationally.
So this is just basically a transfer of wealth and a consolidation of wealth?
That's right. And the bottom line is to destroy the middle class. That seems to be the biggest threat to the globalists who are vying for this international power.
Maybe our middle class viewers should consider this the next time they pick up a instrument of debt
and
known
let
as
me point out that Savior Obama is a tool of these folks, just like McCain was. So the thought that there'd be some major changes, as we've heard all about, is unlikely to happen. But the change can happen when enough people in the congressional districts understand this and they demand that their elected representatives do the right thing and obey their constitution. It can happen. And the more and more people, something like this would be impossible 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, because not enough people knew about this.
Right.
People are coming by giving us thumbs up and beeping their horns because they support this. So the time has come.
Excellent. Hey, I thank you. My viewers thank you. And it's good to see you out here as an American. How did you like that interview? That was Hal Shurtleff. And why I thought it was important is notice the book he was holding? It was called The Creature from Jekyll Island. This has to do with where and who hatched the Fed. Do you think it was for the people, by the people, created by people? No, it was bankers. For the bankers, by the bankers, to steal from you, the American people. But that book he was holding, The Creature from Jekyll Island, I recommend you go to the library, get that book. This book you will read, you'll never be the same, you'll be a lot better in understanding. But the interesting thing was, a little while ago I'd gone down to Washington, D.C., and I had met with the author, G. Edward Griffin. And here's a little bit of our conversation interview down in Washington, where you actually get to listen to the author of, once again, The Creature from Jekyll Island. What a great book. You got to go get this one. And I hope you enjoy G. Edward Griffin. Since I have the author with me, I thought, gee, I could start off with, could you tell our viewers a little bit about this private bank that creates our currency?
I think that the most important thing for people to know about the Federal Reserve who have not studied it is that the Federal Reserve is not a government agency. That comes as a big shock for a lot of people.
I know, everybody says federal, so they think right away.
As part of the cover. But it's not a government agency. In fact, what it is, it's a cartel. It's no different than a sugar cartel or a banana cartel or an oil cartel. This happens to be a banking cartel, which means it's an association of the largest banks in the country who come together for the purpose of promoting their own industry. And they want it to look like a government agency. And in fact, they do have some authority and some power, which makes it very easy to believe that it's a government agency, because you see what happened is when they formed and they had the Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913, they went to Congress and they actually, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they purchased Congress. They purchased congressmen and senators. They gave them very attractive financial reasons to support the Federal Reserve Act. What the act really is nothing but the cartel agreement that the bankers drew up among themselves. They said, how are we going to perpetuate our industry? How are we going to pass our losses on to the taxpayer? How are we going to make sure that nobody has any alternative to using our system and our money? And they said the only way we can do that is to take our agreement and pass it into law. And so the Federal Reserve Act, when you read it, is nothing but a cartel agreement which was passed into law, which means that that people now have to obey the cartel or they go to jail. What a nifty arrangement, you see. Most people don't realize that. I didn't realize it before I started to study.
This is almost like a government-controlled monopoly then, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's not a government-controlled monopoly. It's a privately controlled monopoly. That's what I'm trying to say.
Oh, people, thank you.
It's privately controlled, but it has the appearance of being the government. The only way the government gets into it is they enforce the agreements.
And also they get to utilize the currency when it's first produced, having its greatest purchasing power, right?
Very good, Daniel, very good. The reason that one of the reasons that Congress is willing to do this, because they get cut in on the deal, you see. They have a very good motivation, an incentive, and that is that they can go to the Federal Reserve if they're running out of money and they don't want to raise it from the taxpayers. which they don't want to do because, I mean, not in taxes. They get it from the taxpayers through inflation, but they don't want to do it through taxes because that's more obvious. So they go to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve literally just creates the money out of nothing, out of thin air. And then they go through this hocus pocus of lending it to the federal government at interest. Well, they didn't lend it. There was nothing there to lend. They just created it. That's the word that should be kept in mind. They create the money, and then they charge a service fee for creating it, and they call it interest, but it's not really interest. So it's a lot of hidden stuff that the average person doesn't realize and is not going to realize by studying the textbooks or listening to the news, because they keep that pretty well hidden from the people. So all this business about, oh, the prices are going up, and you hear politicians talk about that a lot. They're just doing that to divert attention away from the real cause, which are the politicians themselves and the Federal Reserve System, which are inflating the currency. They don't want you to think about that. They want you to think about those bad oil companies and those bad landlords.
Well, exactly. Keeping the fingers pointed, it looked the other way. So, wow, you got to listen to a great author who could tell you about the creation of the Federal Reserve and how it was created in secrecy. And you wonder why. This is kind of like these bailout things, huh? Happening on the weekends, you don't know what. This new legislation that they passed says they could spend $5 trillion, but they lied and told you it's only $700 billion, and then they won't tell you where they spend it, and they give it to their buddies, and their buddies, what, drive Learjets and get billion-dollar bonuses? That's your money they're stealing. That's your children's future they're stealing. That's this country they're ruining. So back to the end of the Fed rally, well, we got to meet a lot of regular people. When I say regular, patriot people, people that were aware, people that were willing to come out in the cold, in this case, winter. It had to be about, 10 degrees with the wind chill, and still people made it out. So you should listen to why some of these people made it there. Get a little bit about their understanding and why they're there, and how, not just that, it was amazing the amount of people that drove by that gave these people support as they went by. So here's some of the people I met, kind of people that I thought were great Americans. Not Republicans or Democrats, but great Americans. Maybe it's time you consider being a great American. Hey, here we are back at The Real Story, and where'd we go? We went to the Federal Reserve in Boston so we could meet Jim. Jim, could you tell us what brought you here today, and how did all these people get here?
Well, what brought us here today is the anniversary of the birth of the Federal Reserve System in 1910. On this day, November 22nd, this is the 98th anniversary, and we are staging a peaceful rally to call America's attention to the fact that the Federal Reserve System was brought to life on this date back then. And we are for constitutional sound money. And the Federal Reserve is the force behind unsound money and unconstitutional money. And that's what brings us here.
Oh, interesting, because, as far as for my viewers, we've discussed some things about money, but how would you describe fiat money?
Well, fiat money is debt-based money that's not backed by any asset, such as gold or silver, which is an intrinsic asset that people actually want to own. It is worthless currency, it is unsound, it has led to inflation and the consequent instability of our monetary system, which now leads to a drastic financial crisis.
Will this also lead to the, I want to say, misappropriation, misallocation of funds that actually didn't exist? Because if I could borrow money that didn't exist or create money that never existed, I could do things like fund unjust wars, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Or maybe buy up companies and...
Sure, you can buy up companies, you can spread it around to your cronies. I mean, you can do just basically whatever you feel like doing, and therein lies the problem with fiat money, especially fiat money that's under the control of private bankers and the government that wants to monetize debt for its own purposes. I mean, the people upstream of the money, the fiat money, get all the advantages before the inflation sets in. They're the ones that are recipients of all the largesse, and it basically is on the backs of us, the hardworking Americans, who by and large don't even understand what the scam is.
So if you could create all the money you wanted, is there a possibility you could buy things like politicians?
Very easily. I mean,
even in Massachusetts, where they catch them on TV,
Even in Massachusetts?
It's hard to believe.
You're kidding me. Oh, my goodness. I mean, it is a terrible, terrible system that buys off politicians and buys off people for votes. It is corrupt. It is the basis of the malinvestment in our society, where bad projects get invested in or spent on, like ruinous wars and terrible, terrible projects that should never have been funded. It it is the basis of all the inflation that goes on, and it leads to a terrible instability in our money supply and in our financial system.
This inflation, does it end up impoverishing not only the elders who possibly save some of their, when I say wealth, let's say they actually worked for a living, these elders, and they put some money away for the future so that when they got older, they wouldn't be a burden on society, maybe they could assist their children. But now with the money devaluated, okay, because of inflation, doesn't it end up hurting them?
Well, that's the real tragedy of a fiat money system, is because all these hardworking people who have stashed away real wealth in their entire lifetimes have now found that it's stolen from them by an invisible mechanism of inflation. By inflating the currency so easily as you can with debt-based money, you devalue the dollars that old people and retired people have in their possession.
And also, the other people it may be affecting, what about the youth who now have this burden of debt to shoulder and carry? What are we going to tell America's youth out there in the audience that they owe so that these bankers can have what? More money, more wealth? When it came to the bailout, right, I was discussing where, they created $930 billion in a week from nothing. Isn't that more than what our budgets, the whole federal government budget was in the 80s?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the inflation...
That's 1 week.
You're absolutely right, Dan. I mean, the inflation in this country is so rampant and so pervasive that it engulfs our entire economy. In fact, it dwarfs any of the other reasonable expenses for, saving or investing in our capital and our intellectual base for our kids. And, that's also part of the tragedy, is that these deficits, these debts that we carry, some upwards of $60 trillion on the books in the United States, will be borne by the youth of today. That's why the youth of today need to wake up to these terrible realities.
Interesting. And it's kind of funny, too, that I discussed earlier, that building behind me full of banksters, they don't pay any federal income tax, do they?
No, not at all. In fact, they make money through this. You see, the real scam is not so much that they get direct payments from the bonds that our hardworking Americans owe to them, that they monetize the debt with, because most of that money they do give back to the United States, and the government receives all the benefits of the interest. But the real scam is that the central bankers, the Federal Reserve, and their large commercial banks, who are their direct benefactors, they are able to expand the money supply through the reserve window, through interest rates, and multiply it in a pyramid fashion, because they're only required to hold small reserves based, relative to the amount of money that they loan out. And it's the money that they loan out, really the credit, that creates this debt pyramid that we all owe on. It's the money that they create out of thin air that people pay interest on, and it balloons the money supply. It creates inflation, and as I mentioned before, that's also the root of our monetary and financial instability and what caused this terrible crisis.
Can I ask you a question on that?
Certainly.
Now, since the fractional reserve banking system, like you said, the leveraged out money is how we create new money and create the credit. So if we wanted to use inflation to create credit, if you would have taken the money from the bailout and put it directly into the hands of the people in a much larger economic stimulus package, that money would eventually make it into banks and open up the credit markets, and in turn solve the problem without handing the money to the corporations, correct?
Exactly. Much
better, yeah. No, I would say that that's a much better plan, and I'd say that just letting whatever institutes are in bad straits right now fail. If you let them fail, and if they go bankrupt, that'll be a benefit to society, because these entities are relatively inefficient. The ones that haven't been able to make profits because of bad business decisions, look at the auto industry and all that, and all the money that has been generated from productive individuals would be funneled back into the banks and be a very healthy addition to our economic society.
Plus the idea that the people, let's say the bailout was given to the people, right? If you gave it to the people, they would decide what it's spent on. And there in and of itself, okay, would be more of a free market. Instead of having a few individuals, okay, line their pockets with money, we'd have the people decide what they wanted to invest in. You might want to investigate 9/11 t-shirts. I might want to investigate in similar shirts. But either way, the people would decide what businesses succeed and what businesses fail because they'd be the one. I think you, the viewer, are probably the best person to decide how to spend your money. And the thought that we can redistribute wealth, or that we should allow a bunch of centralist, globalist bankers who actually don't like us redistribute or steal from us, we're going to have problems if we continue along those lines.
Well, I mean, I'd have to agree with you. I mean, when I look at the system, if I'm a bank and I get $100,000 and then I lend out $900,000 on that out of thin air, when those mortgages fail, I now repossess the equivalent of, say, 9 houses. And now I have real assets in my hand. So if I'm a small bank, I might get crippled by that. But if I'm a large bank, I actually end up with a lot of hard assets in my hand, and I actually could benefit from the crippling of the people.
Understand, though, this whole banker bailout piece, think about it. You give money to bankers. What do bankers do? They lend it out at a ratio of about 10 to 1. So those guys over there, what are they doing? They're taking money from nothing and then lending it out at a ratio of like 10 to 1. To who? Their buddy bankers. Who do what with money? Bankers lend it out at ratios about 10 to 1. So now they got 10 times the people paying interest, and they give it to another bank who gets another 10 times the people paying interest, who lends it to another bank who gets another 10 times of the people paying interest, while all you pay the interest on this debt money. Think about what they're doing. They're stealing from you the real wealth and value of this nation, and if you sit back and do nothing, then hey, you might want to get used to living in, Argentina. Many of these socialist communist republics. Hey, any of the, totalitarian states usually work the same way. So what'd you think? There's some of the people that took time out of their day on an extremely cold day when a lot of people were, comfortable watching maybe a college football game. This was 11/22/08. And why that date's important, I mentioned that our president was shot on that date. Well, it's also the date that the Fed was created. Okay? Yeah, they put this thing together and passed it when most of your congressmen and senators had already gone away on vacation, because back in 1913 when it was created, you needed a lot of time to get back to your state, if you were from Seattle or whatever, let alone Hawaii. So a lot of the people had already started their, Congress was getting ready to adjourn. So they did it while everybody was away. They did it on that day. It's interesting. You should probably read the Federal Reserve Act. That's right, you can find it. Once again, it's not part of our government. It's a separate company. Privately held. But if you go and you read that act, this is interesting, where we gave all this power that was Congress's power to begin with, the power to coin money and set the value thereof. Why did our founding fathers write it that way? And take a look at this act. Go down to where it says they don't have to pay any state taxes. No federal taxes. No local taxes. They created a private banking cartel that's stealing your wealth every single day as they devalue your currency and create money from nothing, charge you the interest for that money creation, and through inflation slowly enslave you. And if you think I'm lying, ask your parents what the house used to cost. What did a car used to cost? What did a meal out used to cost? What did a steak used to cost? And so as the town gets buried in this inflationary debt scheme, and not just that, all the currency made from debt, I'm getting windy, but I want you to start thinking. Start thinking about the greater reason why people are unemployed. Start thinking about the greater reason why everything costs more money. Why your parents, who may have put some money away, now have to eat, substandard food because what? The money they put away isn't enough. Inflation, the hidden tax. So hopefully you enjoyed this. We're going to come back with some more End the Fed stuff for you. And think about this. These people got off their derrieres. Maybe you could do that. If not, I've got to ask you, what will you use for an excuse when your grandchildren and your children ask you, but Mom, Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, you knew that these bankers were stealing from us. What did you do about it? So as soon as you shut me off, one click, I'm gone. I want you to go to the mirror. Practice your excuses while you did nothing, while your nation was taken out from under you by a bunch of globalist banksters.